And he brings me this idea for this company that was doing at the time black cars on demand, right? So like town cars, to go to the airport or out to dinner or whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm walking out, and I kind of looked at my wife and I was like, "Oh, that was the dumbest idea ever," right? I was like, just like gut reaction, like, mm-mm.
Yeah.
And the company ended up being Uber, obviously.
Yo, my people, welcome back to the Venture Room, the #1 platform for aspiring entrepreneurs. My name's Jamal.
My name's Kareem.
And today we've got a very special guest. One of the, I'd say, heavyweights in the fintech space. I'll give you that. He's raised over 100 million.
50 million, but
50 million.
I'll take 100. Why not?
He raised over 50 million and he's launched multiple 7-figure fintech startups. So yeah, I'll let him do his intro.
Wonderful. Well, thanks guys for having me. Just bumped into you on the street and, you got to interview me and my daughter. So name's St.Clair. I have been an entrepreneur now, such as that's defined, for 15 years. I don't know. I'm getting a little long in the tooth. But I've launched a variety of businesses, both fintechs, media businesses in the past, peer-to-peer marketplaces, which I'll never do again. Lots of fun, but difficult. And I think if nothing else, as my old boss would say, I'm here to share my confusion. I'm still figuring it out as I go along. So hopefully I can offer a few pearls of wisdom, but if nothing else, feel free to do the exact opposite of what I say.
I mean, it's quite interesting how we bumped into you. I don't know if you want to dive into a bit of that.
Yeah, so for those of you who haven't seen, we were doing street interviews in Battersea Power Station, and I happened to notice Neil's jumper and his blazer, so I was like, let me go speak to that guy. And then he ended up doing an interview with us and decided to come on a podcast. So it was really good to have you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it's quite interesting, like when you put yourself out there, who you can bump into. So yeah, quite lucky. So where I wanted to start with is kind of your background before business. So like when you were growing up, what was like, did you have any struggles when you were younger? What was your childhood like?
Yeah, no, happy to talk about that. So I'm one of the lucky ones. I had two awesome parents, still do, still alive, still married. I'm going with our 50th wedding anniversary. And they weren't entrepreneurs. My mom was a teacher in an era where, I think, in another life, in another time, my mom probably would have been like a real badass lawyer.
Yeah.
Dad was a pharmaceutical executive. And they just gave me a really great path, a really great start to life. Gave me the structure that I needed, education as an emphasis. And I realize now, having worked with, and known thousands of people, how rare that frankly is.
Yeah.
So I was lucky in that regard. And I think we were talking about a little bit earlier before the camera started rolling this, for whatever reason, there was always the spark of ambition, right? Whether that comes from a place of fear where it's like, well, I have to do this because I'm competitive and I'm going to beat these other people and just be at the top of the pyramid. Or it's just because it's like, it's fun. And if not me, then who? I can't quite say, but I've always had these little businesses and side hustles. My mom likes to tell the story of how I pretended when I was, 10 years old that I was a lawyer and would represent people when they were getting detention and then charge them. And then I did have to give that money back. But, if nothing else,
I was just selling sweets at school, but you were a lawyer. That's pretty impressive.
But yeah, so that I had a nice start to life in New Jersey, from America, obviously originally, and here now. And then just, I think lucky to have a bit of maybe natural intelligence that allowed me to go on to university and find my way into this world.
Yeah. Did you have any particular, because I feel like sometimes successful people have a struggle when they were younger. Was there any hardships that you had when you were younger, or was it pretty?
Yeah, so I think my biggest hardship, if it is to be called a hardship, and I recognize that I've had a pretty privileged life, was I was the guy that always lived in two worlds.
Yeah.
So I was the athlete that also took sort of what we would call in America advanced placement courses, right?
Okay.
And I never quite fit into either space because I'd be sitting on the bus with my football buddies and we'd be all playing, bro or whatever. But the reality is, here I was also, reading Shakespeare, right? For my AP Lit class. And then I'd be in the AP Lit class and I'm the only guy there that, ever even knows what about bench press is, right?
Yeah.
And so I lived between these two worlds, and I felt like an outcast in some ways, even though I had friends, right? Yeah. But I definitely didn't quite fit into one box. And it took me a while, maybe kind of around university, college days, to find that there were people like me out there, right? And to find that community, that tribe. And that was exceedingly important, I think, in many ways accelerated my career. And I would just say to anybody out there that's feeling that way right now, or like me, is what we call a polymath, right? Has lots of interests, maybe doesn't feel like, they have one single path. there's a great TED talk, and I'm blanking on the woman's name that did it, about being a polymath.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, it was only a few years ago that I saw it.
Yeah.
And I actually cried when I saw it, because for many, many years I was like, I said, what's wrong with me? Like, I don't want to just do one thing. And I see all my friends, they're just a lawyer. They're just a doctor. And I'm like, I'm an entrepreneur, but like, I want to do these other things too. I want to write a book. I want to go do this. Right. Yeah. And I said, well, something must be wrong with me. I must be off. Right. Yeah. Emily Wapiddick, that's her name.
Okay.
And I saw this TED talk and I said, wow. So there are other people out there like me, and it's okay. Maybe I do have a little ADD or whatever, but that's actually a benefit. That's an upside, and I should indulge in that. And if I can put a little structure around it, maybe it's a good differentiator. So that's sort of the struggle that I felt cognitively. But for anybody out there that is facing that, there's another side to the mountain, and just with a little time and patience, you'll get there. And the things that make you weird when you're young are the things that make you awesome and successful when you're older.
It's your superpower.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely right.
I was a bit the same, to be fair, because I was in like the swim team. So I was a national swimmer, which wasn't too cool when we were younger. But then I was also like playing football and rugby. And like I was so good at different things, I never really focused at one. And it's like, it's quite hard when you're good at everything, like to just pick a lane really, and to know what your path is, I think.
It is. And I think, there is a benefit to having an expertise, right? And it depends a little bit on your path in life. If you're going to go the corporate route, and no knock to anyone that does that, obviously I've chosen the entrepreneurial route, you do have to be a mile deep, right? For the most part, because when I'm hiring, right, and I'm somebody that hires a lot of people, it's great if you have lots of interest, but if I'm hiring a director of marketing, you better be damn good at marketing, right? You better know everything about it. And I don't care what your other interests are. You better be in that space, right? So develop your expertise. And even if you are going to be sort of a polymathic person like myself and have lots of interests, you should still have that one point of emphasis, right? I knew pretty early on I wasn't going to be a physicist, right? Like math is not my strong suit, right? Now, you also have to know your weaknesses. And it's really important that you spend time studying those weaknesses, because you are only as strong as your weakest link. And it's so fascinating how you can pull and extract knowledge from things that you didn't know about or don't have a skill set in, and now cross apply that to areas where you do have a skill. So I read a lot of books by in the physics realm. I don't understand half of it, because oh, that's a fascinating idea. They conceived it in one way, but maybe I can pull that into my life. The reality is, pick your lane and your emphasis, but it's totally okay to have those varied interests. Because if you want to go, say, the entrepreneurial route, if you don't have the ability to be a marketer, to be a leader and a manager, to understand the sales cycle, to be able to do a budget, like, again, I'm not a math guy, but I have had to do more budgets and more sort of analyses of business metrics than you can possibly imagine. You have to have that ability, or at least that desire and willingness to learn. And so it's perfectly okay to have those interests, but you got to find that lane that allows those interests to be your superpower.
Because I feel like a lot of young people struggle. I definitely did, was picking a lane, because I always chased the money really. So I thought, okay, what's making the most money?
Literally.
So I always wanted to be like an investment broker. So I started doing that when I left uni and hated it. And I was pretty lost for like a good 5 years. Then I thought, you know what, let me think about what am I interested in? What really what could I do with money aside, basically, not included. And I basically picked a path and thought, you know what, I really like speaking to successful people and talking about businesses and entrepreneurship. And when you find your lane, I feel like you're way more dedicated. So I definitely say that.
It's true. Now I will say, listen, I'm an ardent capitalist. We still live in a capitalist structured society. Get some money, right? Mark Cuban is actually my cousin, my third cousin, and he talks a lot about the fallacy of following your passion, right? Because the reality is, you got to make some money, and then you can follow your passion, right? There are a lot of people out there that are really good at making little knickknacks or something, but not going to maybe be able to make a living out of that. Maybe you will, right? And if you have a nice privileged background and you can sit there and take some time and mom and dad can support you, great. Maybe you can build that up. But the reality is most of us have to go out there and hustle a little bit and build these things. So I would say at the end of the day, yes, find a passion, maybe do it as a side hustle, and then build it up into something that then can become your main thing. But your story is one that I've heard a lot, where people they chase the money, they become the investment broker, it's miserable. But you know what? It's good experience, because I define my life by the negative. What do I mean by that? I look at the things that I've done, and I know probably more prescriptively what I don't want, the things I don't want to repeat, the things I don't want to do, than necessarily what I do want to do. As I'm getting a little older now, I'm starting to concretize around the idea of knowing a little bit more about what I want to do. But especially in your youth, it's more important. Life is just it's always like dating. I'll guarantee most of your audience could say right now, the bad dating experience that they've had, because maybe they're not married, so they know what they don't want, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean you know what you do want, right? Because you may not even know that person is out there with red hair and freckles that you'd be attracted to because you never even experienced that, right? So there's all sorts of variations of what you could want, but you darn well know what you don't want because you've experienced that and have gone on the other side. And I will just say one last point, which is I'm now, 36. Money's nice.
Yeah.
It's nice to have, but there comes a certain point, and it's not being a billionaire, right? It's even maybe being a low-level millionaire or making a couple $100,000 a year where you're like, your needs are provided for, and that incremental additional amount of wealth doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't make you that much happier.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. And so if anybody out there is starting a business or thinking of selling a business, and you're like, well, I could get $5 million today, right? Or if I hold on to the business, maybe I get $500 million tomorrow. Well, yeah, there's a difference between $5 and $500 million. The difference is a few more houses, right? Does that really make you that much happier? So at a certain point,
and there's always a bigger house, isn't there?
Yeah, and there's always more and more. And it's like, you have to be that person. But the reality is, money isn't what makes you happy. If you're miserable in what you're doing, step out and go do something else, right? Money's nice. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
There are many, many, many other things out there that will lead you to a path to happiness and self-actualization. And a lot of people will be sitting there saying, oh, I don't believe it. Experience enough life and you will eventually.
It's true. So I want to take it back through your journey basically after college. So I know you went into journalism. Can you talk us through just the path you walked straight after college?
Yeah. So did my undergraduate work at Boston University. Actually went to Oxford for a hot bit here as part of a study abroad program, and then my graduate work at Yale immediately after Boston University. And I went to school to become the next great TV journalist, next great TV presenter. And they have an amazing school of journalism and communication there. And that's exactly what I did. So I turned down some of the investment banking job offers, and I even turned down a production offer from Bloomberg to go and work in the news business, but basically was told that your chance of getting on camera, good luck. You'd be in your 30s before you'd even get on camera.
Why is that? Just because it's competitive?
The way that they typically had things structured, and this is in an era before sort of personality driven news. It was more like you got to earn your stripes. You've got to really, they didn't want somebody on there that hadn't had 10, 15 years of experience working the floor and really knew it before they would throw you on camera. And I respected that. And I still do. But, and it was a nice offer to be in New York. It's like almost a 6-figure salary right out of college. I was like, that's crazy. All right.
And when you're that young, it feels like $1 million.
It felt like everything. Right? I had no debt. I had no responsibilities. My apartment was probably a couple of $1,000s or whatever. I was like, man, I could live high on the hog here. But I knew what I wanted to do. And so you know what I did? I went and took a job for $23,000 a year in upstate New York, which is not New York City. Let's put it that way. About 2.5, 3 hours outside of that, in a little town called Binghamton.
Yeah.
And I got to go on camera. And it was the most amazing experience of my life. If we have more time, I would tell you the story of the first time I ever went live in full, but I'll give you the reduced version, which is first live shot I ever had, right? Little light comes on and, there's no screwing up.
Well, you're nervous at the beginning.
Of course you're nervous, right? Because you've never done it before. Bottom line, it was a huge story and it kept escalating. So you have in your ear what's called an IFB.
Yeah.
And every 30 seconds leading into the 2 minutes before I was about to go live, I would kept getting a new producer from a new market. So started with Binghamton, then Syracuse, then Albany, which is the capital of New York. So now we're talking 1.5 million, 2 million people total. Then New York City. And finally, last thing I hear before I go live is, oh, we're going to kick you over to Atlanta. And I was like, Atlanta?
What?
What's in Atlanta? I don't have a station there. CNN.
Oh, okay.
And the very last thing that I hear from the anchor, who was Rick Sanchez at the time, is not only are we going to take you live on CNN, but we're also going live on CNN International, and the BBC is going to reciprocate. And so I ended up going live for the first time ever to potentially, if everybody had been watching, I think it's like 500 million people or something like that.
You can't mess up, no room for error.
Yeah, I don't even remember it, but just you kind of go into just training mode and just get laser focused, and it worked out. But so it started my career as a TV journalist, telling stories. Did that for about 3 years between Binghamton and
I was just going to say, just on the back of that, the first time I filmed, I was super nervous as well. But we can actually edit it, so it's not live.
Yeah, it's different, isn't it?
When you're live, there's no editing.
There's no takes.
You drop an F-bomb on camera and you're paying a nice FCC fine. It was an amazing experience. Yeah. Wouldn't trade it for anything. I'm so glad that I did it. Wasn't making any money. Had to get a little family support to just pay my bills in a town that wasn't particularly expensive. But I'm glad I did it because it was my passion. If I hadn't done it, I would regret it. And the reality is, again, I live my life also by analogies. And so life is storytelling. It's making arguments. And so the skills that I gained, the ability to tell a story and to also to listen to somebody else's stories and to formulate a structure around that story are the skill sets that I gleaned from journalism. And also you kind of create a pretty good bullshit detector, to be perfectly honest, right? So I did that for a while, but there's a quote from Churchill that I quite like that says, at a certain point, one must stop taking the news and start making it to be an actor and not a critic. And that was banging around in my head. And one day, there was a family in New York. I was covering Staten Island at the time. And they lost 3 sons in a drunk driving accident. They weren't driving. It was another driver that barreled into the car and killed all 3 of their sons. And my job was to go knock on that door. I was what's called a one-man band. So I was the cameraman and on camera. And stick a camera in their face and document their pain. To whose benefit? That must be hard. You know? And I started to feel the emotional toll of it a little bit as well, even though we as journalists often become very cynical. And you know what I did instead of actually filming them right away? I mean, I had to get the story. I put my camera down and I prayed with them. It's like, this family's hurting. Like, what can I do? What could I do, right? Other than that. And I walked back in, and the combination of that emotional toll plus the idea that I wanted to stop telling other people's stories and start to write one of my own. That's what eventually led me to getting out of journalism. And it's not to knock journalism. It's an amazing thing that journalists do, especially at a local level. We talked a little earlier, you know, media and journalism has changed a lot, but there are still great journalists out there doing great work. But it ultimately wasn't for me. I was like, I want to be the guy on the other side of the camera that's being interviewed by somebody. And I'm not going to do that just being a journalist today. And that, you know, you have to be aware of yourself, and that's a little ego, right? It's a little arrogance. And I said, all right, but I'm going to set myself on that path and see what I can do. And here I am being interviewed by you guys. Right?
Just before, you know, getting to that stage, what were you like in your younger years? Like as a kid, were you always that outgoing, outspoken person with that confidence, or?
I'd say yes. You probably have to ask my parents. They would remember better than I do. But, you know, from what I can see and what I've heard, I've always been that guy that, you know, not only was kind of outspoken and very comfortable in crowds and talking to others, but just also had a lot of crazy ideas. And I said, how can I make that idea a reality, right? And I wasn't scared, and I didn't become tired at the thought of starting something and doing it and seeing it, you know, through. So, and that's a pretty big differentiator. I'll guarantee a lot of your audience right now, they have an idea. Ideas are a dime a dozen, right? It's all about execution. And how do we know that? Because just look at, there's a synchronicity to ideas. Like all of a sudden, a bunch of people, let's wind the clock back to sort of the early days of like social media with Facebook. Like a lot of people had the same idea at the same time, right? Because a lot of tumblers in life had aligned that an idea of a social media network made sense. You had your Friendster, you had your MySpace, you had your Facebook, whatever, right? All kind of coming together at the same time. So ideas are a dime a dozen. A lot of people have the same idea. But Friendster's not around anymore. MySpace, I don't know, kind of limped to the finish line. Facebook's still there, but experiencing maybe some challenges right now. Like the reality is it's all about execution. And then after a while, then it's all about sort of ongoing innovation. That's a whole other topic. But to get to that point, if you have an idea, do it. It's better to fail at something and say, at least I tried, right? First of all, right? I'm a Jewish person, and the way that we orient our life is not to maximize outcome, but to minimize regret, right? And that's a very just little twist in the way that you live your life. But at the end of the day, saying, hey, you know, I made the most money because I was a great investment banker, but I didn't do these 5 other things. Or maybe I didn't make as much money, but I tried everything. Which life would you rather live, right? The life where you tried everything, even if it didn't work out, or the life where it was successful, but sort of minimal in some ways, right? I don't know. I mean, that's a question you have to ask yourself. But if you have an idea, do it, even if you're going to fail, because you're going to learn so much from it. And then beyond that, just focus on that execution, because having the idea and sticking it in the back of your mental closet, it's just going to collect dust, and somebody else is going to outpace you and have that same idea. And I think a lot of people just like, you know, they take comfort in the idea and like, oh, well, someday I'll quit my job and I'll go do this thing. No, you won't. Right. And so that I think maybe was part of the differentiator, was just, I always said, hey, I have this idea. I'm going to go try it. Right. Certainly failed more times than I succeeded, but it set me on that path now, also understanding how to do risk assessment and take the right idea. Right. You know, not every idea is a good idea too, just to be clear. Right. At a certain point, you can't just test everything. But
I think I think even just speaking to loads of different people, what I've come to learn is everyone wants to be successful. Everyone has an idea. The difference is whether you execute on that idea or not. Even the homeless man at Tesco probably wants to be rich, probably has an idea, but hasn't got the heart or the belief that they can do it, and they don't execute. So at the end of the day, you're not going to get anywhere, are you?
Execution is so key. And Steve Jobs had a great quote on this, and I'll paraphrase it to an extent, which is you've got to say no to 10 $1 billion ideas to say yes to one $10 billion idea. The outcome may hypothetically be the same if you could say do 10 $1 billion ideas, right? Yeah. Same amount of money. But the one $10 billion idea has that capacity because of that focus to an extent on that idea to scale even beyond that, and has a much higher likelihood of actually having success. Yeah. And so you may have lots of ideas. Find the one you want where you have a little bit of expertise, a little bit of passion, and also has a product market fit, most importantly. And just roll with that and focus on execution, and don't fall into what I call shiny bauble syndrome. Yeah. And entrepreneurs have that because, again, we talked earlier, like you're polymathic by your nature, right? You're somebody that probably does have a lot of ideas and interests. But once you decide to go on that idea, there does have to be that level of focus, because if not, you'll find that bias playing into the way that you operate the business. And I can tell you this from my first company, I had that, where I was like, well, what about this idea and that idea and that idea? And the reality is, like, just as a simple example, when you're creating a product roadmap, there's so much you can jam into a product. Yeah. Half of it's not even providing utility to the audience that you're selling it to, right? But it's just ego throwing it in there, right? Just because you had the idea. And the best products that I've ever rolled out, I've had 3 things that have gone into that product that were actual operational ideas. And I've had a list of probably 300 things that I wanted to get to that were now triaged for a later time, so that I could be focused on getting to product execution, marketing, and selling the hell out of it. And then at some point, really listening to the feedback loop of my audience and saying, here's my 300 ideas. What's my audience wanting? And then maybe what's the one thing that maybe they don't even know that they want, but they would use it once I've got it. But the reality is, if you overstuff the turkey from day one, you're going to put a Frankenstein product. You're probably going to run out of money for marketing and sales. We talked about this a bit earlier. And at the end of the day, with entrepreneurship, once you make that move into it and pick that idea, it is all about focus and not listening to the last person that you talk to and say, oh, I'm going to radically change my idea because this person had that thing. The reality is not everybody's going to agree with you. Not everyone's going to like what you do. So the last voice you listen to should not be the most controlling voice, right? Unless they really do have a good idea. And at the same time, strip things down to their bare minimum and focus on focus. Because otherwise, you're just going to put so much crap into something and it's going to serve no purpose for you or your audience.
I want to kind of talk about your launch story for is it Unbuy That was the first company?
That's the very first one. Yeah,
I want to hear the launch story of that and how you felt making that jump. Jumping the gap.
So was that now?
10, not too long
10, 15 years ago. It was actually somewhere between 10 and 15 years ago. I don't remember. So started Unbuy That originally with my then girlfriend, then fiance, now wife, still my wife. And so we were co-founders in that, brought a team around us. And I actually started when I was in graduate school. So I was at Yale at the time and had this idea sort of on a drive. I think you reminded me that was to Philadelphia over a weekend. Pitched it to my then girlfriend. She's like, great idea. Let's do it. Now, I will tell you the fundamental mistake I made. I'll just give you the quick background on Unbuy That, which was a peer-to-peer marketplace for buying and reselling hotel rooms. So nice idea, big idea. Basically took advantage of economic upside downside where,
so like lastminute.com
kind of sort of, but peer-to-peer. So like you'd have a hotel room that now you couldn't use either because you were locked into it. And they're like, well, if you cancel, we're still charging you $1,000. So sell it to me for 800, take a smaller loss. I get the utility of the hotel room. The hotel gets my business because now I'm probably going to buy stuff at the, at the bar or whatever. And you minimize your loss or flip it. So in the US, like, let's look at the Super Bowl. If you got a hotel room a year before the Super Bowl for $500 a night, how much could you sell that for 2 days before the Super Bowl? Right. And if that marketplace didn't exist, neither you nor that person nor the hotel could experience that upside. Cool idea, big really idea. Good, so many problems with it because, first of all, I didn't know crap about the hotel industry. Right. I know how it worked. I didn't even know how to do systems integrate. Like it was. I was like, oh, I've stayed at a hotel, therefore I'm clearly an expert, right? No, not at all, right? And that's a fallacy that a lot of young entrepreneurs fall into. Is they're like, well, I'm a consumer of this thing, therefore I'm an expert. And no, you're not, right? There's a whole other operational side that you don't know. And so I strongly encourage most young entrepreneurs to try to avoid doing, say, like marketplaces or consumer products unless you have a real either creative expertise and like you're the world's best t-shirt designer, or you really fundamentally understand the operational side of the business. Because hotels are a much more complex business. They really do want to know their customers. They didn't like the idea when we pitched them on this of me selling the room to you, and all of a sudden they don't have the right name in the system, they don't have the right loyalty points, they don't know who you are, they don't know how to upsell you on these other things. They were quite resistant to the idea. And also the thing that I didn't really understand was cancellation of hotels is a very minimal kind of thing. It actually wasn't as big a market as I thought. I got sort of my eyes wide about what's called the TAM, the total addressable market. I'm like, wow, it's hundreds of billions of dollars in hotels. What if we can just capture 1%? Well, reality is my actual market was only 1% of that multiple billion, and I could only capture 1% of that. So I'm capturing like 0.001% of the overall hotel market, not enough to make a business out of, right? Ultimately, and that was one thing that I hadn't done the proper research on. So there were a lot of early learnings that I wish I had known going in. But to tell you the launch story of the first business, even though it ultimately didn't work out, and I often say first companies are like first loves. They always hold a special place in your heart, but you're probably not going to get married to them, right? So love the business, love doing it, learned so much. But the launch story, so we went up to Kennebunk in Maine. It's a nice little sort of coastal town in Maine. And has a hotel trade that's mostly sort of like B&Bs, bed and breakfasts, which typically have a pretty tight cancellation policy. Like once you're booked, like if you cancel, you still have to pay because they can't afford and absorb a cancellation like a Marriott or a Hilton can, right? So they have to be much less flexible. So like, can we go up there and kind of pitch this idea to these holiday makers up there during something called, was it Christmas Promenade or something? They have a big Christmas event where thousands of people descend on the town. There's a silly story. So basically, myself and my entire staff, we all dressed up in like Santa Claus and like elf costumes. And the way that this thing was set up was there was the main bit you couldn't park in the downtown. So you had to park or quite far away and either like wait for a shuttle or walk quite a bit. And Maine in December is cold as hell. And so we brought our car up and we were like, we're going to shuttle people. And we said, we'll give you a free ride, but the cost of your ride is listening to our pitch, right?
That's smart.
And so there was 4 or 5 of us. One of the guys was local to there and kind of knew the landscape. And we did that for pretty much 2 days straight, signed up, 500 to 1,000 people as the initial early adopters. It was a good way to prove product market fit. And then we also went around and pitched all the local businesses on it, froze our asses off, embarrassed ourselves a little bit. But you know what? It was a great experience, brought the team together in a lot of ways, got us going, got our first initial customers. And more importantly, when we went then to go and pitch VCs, I was being incubated, or the company was being incubated at the time at was then called the Yale Entrepreneurial Institute. So I was in grad school in between my first and second year. And I applied to this thing, which is now called the Yale Sci City Center for Entrepreneurship. And it's a hugely competitive program. I just was lucky that they let me in as sort of the representative of the company and the company in as an idea. And while I was there, it's actually when I decided to, maybe step back from grad school and focus on this full time. Because again, focus is everything. And it was just an incredible experience.
Were you not a bit scared of the unknown, just diving in?
What I will guarantee you right now is if the 3 of us walked into, I don't know, name a bank, Chase. And just Chase, JP Morgan, whatever, and just sat down and like talked to half their investment banking staff, they'd all say, God, I'd love to go start this company. I've had this idea for 10 years, but I'm just not willing to leave the 6-7 figure job right now zone. And the comfort of that. If only I could, and because it'll take 2 years before that business really could be an idea. There are so many people right now experiencing that, both at the low end where they can't raise the money because of whatever circumstance, and at the high end where they get too damn comfortable. So the answer to your question in a long-winded way is, of course I had that fear, right? I had a little bit of backing where I didn't have to have as much fear as maybe other people, but at a certain point, you just got to say, fuck it, you just got to do it, right? You just got to jump in, and you have to be comfortable. This is one of the most important things. You have to be comfortable losing everything, right? And I will tell you, as someone that's now a little bit on the other side of that mountain, I've been down to my last $5. My family said, hey, no more. We're not supporting you anymore. And I was on my own. I've been down to my last $5 more than once. Really? It sucks. It's really hard to be like, I literally don't know if I can afford my rent, if I can afford dinner tonight. I certainly can't, take a girl out or whatever. Like, that's a tough reality. But it's a real one. And if you're not ready to do that, right? And it's not, by the way, it's not just the business's money, right, that gets down to its last $5, right? Because worst thing that happens in a business goes out of business is it just goes bankrupt and fine. It's a piece of paper, right? Get some pissed off people, might face a lawsuit, but whatever. Like that's, you can come back from that. When you're personally out of money, right? And that's one thing that I look a lot with young entrepreneurs is like, what is your personal runway? Because if you're the CEO of this company that I'm investing in or partnering with, and here you are down to your last $5, you're not going to be caring about what the business is doing. You're caring about how to survive at that point, right?
I want to pick apart dive into the launch phase, the practical steps.
Sure.
So I had a business idea when I was at uni for like a bill splitting app. This is way before COVID. And so I wasn't technical, had no money. And what I do is I pitched to all the restaurants in the area and they all said, yeah, we love the idea. We'd love to get it going. But for me, finding an engineer with no money to build a product for you was nearly impossible. And I couldn't get over that initial hurdle. So what would you say I should have done in terms of I've got no money or limited funds and I haven't got any technical expertise? How do I get a product?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a couple of answers to that. One is you can always try to find an accelerator or some type of structured setup where they're like, hey, it's a great idea. We don't really need to see the traction. We believe in the idea. We can provide you the infrastructure. And universities will often have that. A lot of big banks have that because a lot of corporations, what's called CVC, corporate venture capital now, are looking for young entrepreneurs and bringing in innovation. It's cheap for them, right? Really, because they'll take a large stake in it. There's a lot of venture studios out there. That's a nice way to do it because coding, the technical side of a digital tech startup, has become much more commodified. Back in the day when I started this, 10, 15 years ago, you had to have a technical co-founder, right? Or you had to have a substantial amount of money to go out and have enough technical skill yourself to now talk to an external coding firm. And I'll tell you, that's one of the things that I did is I sat with our original CTO, my first business, and I said, I don't know anything about it. I don't even know what I'm asking you. Like, I don't know how to ask it in
you don't even know what you don't know.
Right? I was like, I know what I want. I know the outcome, but I don't know if that's realistic or if the time frame that you're quoting me is realistic, right? So I said, I'm going to sit with you for the next 6 months.
As well.
Or the cost, right? I'm going to sit with you for the next 6 months and I want to understand. Now, I'm not a coder. It's not how my mind works. I've taken many false steps towards that because I thought, oh, well, what if I could be a coder and I could just like pop out a startup like every week? But it's just not how I am. And the reality is that coders and business side people, we need each other, right? There's a reason why those are just two different kind of minds and they need to come together, right? It is much easier if you have a technical skill set and a little bit of a business mind to just go out and code something out over the weekend and pop it up. And oftentimes these billionaires you see at Google or Facebook or whatever, they had that initial skill set to just pop out an MVP, right? A minimally viable product. That is an upside. That is a benefit. But if you're not that person, if you don't have that technical skill, if you're just the hustler and the business person, do look for that corporate venture capital and those accelerator programs. That can be very helpful. Your university can do that. Oftentimes, your local sort of council may have a program as well. Often in America, we see that there's a program within your state or city that'll support that. It's not a lot of money, but it's enough to maybe get started. You can, of course, try to find a technical co-founder, right? Or somebody that's willing to come on for sweat equity. There are people out there like that, but I will tell you, they know their value a lot more so now, right, than even 10, 15 years ago. They know that, and they have their opportunity cost. So working with you for maybe 10% equity in your company on a sweat basis, or I can go do this other job for $50,000 today, right? They're running those same calculations. They got to really believe in you. But the other point is, if you go get a little initial traction, sometimes you can go back to your own customers and say, hey, you like this idea. You clearly see the benefit of it. Why don't you invest even just a couple $1,000s or something, right? I'll give you in perpetuity free usage of the product should it get off the ground. But why don't you take a little bit of a stake in this? So, assuming you don't have access to early capital or friends and family, and there, by the way, there are some pre-seed funds that are like, they call themselves first idea funds. You come in with an idea on the back of a napkin. They're like, I just like that idea. I want to get in super early. Now they extract their pound of flesh. Don't get me wrong, right? They might write you a check for 50,000 pounds. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it'll sound like a lot. But the reality is that goes super fast, right? You can't even code anything out for 50 grand. But they'll write that check, but they're going to take a big chunk of your company for taking that super early stage risk. So there's always trade-offs when you're doing sort of risk pricing like this. So the simple answer is those are some pathways, but there is no absolute answer at the end of the day. Now with AI and some of the things that are coming out, there are a lot of no-code platforms now where you can go out and find a pre-packaged basis for what you want to build, and you can build on top of that infrastructure. You are going to have some minor technical skills in order to do that, and you can teach yourself that. There's tutorials out there and find forums. You can do a lot more yourself. It's not building things from scratch anymore, where you have to just go in and create sort of a full code base and repository. It's a little easier, and it will get exponentially easier over the next decade, to the point where digital coding skill sets are going to be highly, I think, commodified into the sort of idea of AI. Don't get me wrong, you're still going to need somebody that knows how to work that and is going to know how to do some manual fixes on that. So it will get easier, but for now, those are the best pathways.
Yeah. So in terms of the steps, then you kind of solidify your idea, you pitch it to as many people as possible, and ask them for the help that you need, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you'll find an unexpected champion. You know, the guy that owns your local pizza parlor, you know, he might have just lived a really frugal life. He might be sitting on a lot more cash than you realize. And I've had investors that you would think, why am I taking this meeting? This guy or gal showing up, they look a little sloppy or whatever, like what's going on? You'd be surprised who has some money out there, right? Whether it's through their own savings, they've just lived a frugal life and now want to invest, or they've got some family money or a business that you didn't even realize. And I've walked out of meetings with $500,000 checks from people. I was like, this check gonna clear? I don't know. But like, there's some very interesting. Take every meeting you can. Right? I guess at the end of the day, worst cases, if it's not them, they're gonna know the person that maybe to introduce you to set you on that path.
So say you haven't got any family members that have any wealth. How would you go about networking from scratch then? If you have no contacts, how would you start to network to speak to people?
I mean, you have to be bold, right? If you're going to be an entrepreneur, like it's just, you guys just plucked me off the street, right? And here we are having a chat. So it's emailing, it's messaging, it's, social media, DMing whomever you can. I mean, my cousin Mark Cuban is very well known. Like if you send him a DM, he will get back to you. Like more often than not. And if it's a good idea, he may say, hey,
I'll do it later on today.
You got 2 minutes.
Everyone's going to start spamming him now.
Check it out. No, I mean, he's very open about it. I think he used to be responding to all of them. I think now he's a little more, now he's been on Shark Tank, he's a little more. But the simple reality is for me, let's say, let me run the quick ratio. I think my co-founder and I probably took 500 conversations to get, to get our initial investment. And we certainly don't have 500 investors, right? Wow. And we're two relatively successful guys with track record, right? And your hit rate is going to be, 5-10% success, right? Simple reality. So, and when you're a young entrepreneur just starting out, the other reality is your success rate is going to be 1 to 5%, right? So you might have to take 1,000 conversations. Now, go out, talk to people, pick the people that you think have an expertise, an interest. Don't waste their time. Be succinct, be brief, get in front of them, take those risks, tap your business plan into the bottom of a pizza box and send them a free pizza. Like, get creative, right? And also, of course, go to networking events. So like here in the UK, there's something called like the Fintech Circle. It's UK Fintech Week actually right now. Like, go to these events. They're often free. Sometimes there's a cost to them, but go out and meet these folks and you'll meet that expert. And then, like I said, even if it's not the person that's exactly what you need, maybe they know the person that is. Because they've been doing it for 20 years, right? So if you meet me and I'm like, hey, I don't really know about this part of fintech, I probably know the guy or gal that does that, right? I can point you in the right direction. There's always trade groups for this, and of course, chat rooms and other things like that. But I would say overall, at a certain point, it's also about taking your destiny into your own hands. Create an event yourself, right? It's not about being passive and going to somebody else's event. Like,
be proactive.
Be proactive. Say like, hey, I'm gonna throw a little cocktail party and invite the people that I want to this. I'm gonna go set up a little thing on the street and just pull some random people. And like, you never know. Like, if you're waiting for things to happen, you'll be waiting a long wait.
It's true.
Right? So as much proactivity as you can, as much networking as you can. I run a little private membership society and have been doing it now for a decade, well before I could properly afford it, where I just invite interesting people doing interesting things to come have dinner with me. And I have had dinner with people who I have no business being around, right? Who are like Nobel Prize winners, Academy Award winning actors. Like, it's insane. And it was all about, now I have probably 3,000 people in my network from whom I've collected a lifetime of favors that I've never called on. But if I needed to, right? Everything from getting, extracted out of a war zone to raising $1 million of investment capital, I've got that. I've got that knock on the door. And start early. And don't always just look at the person that has 20 years experience. Look at your peer group, right? There are people within your peer group that, maybe do have that family money that are looking to invest, or maybe just know a guy or gal, or maybe could be your co-founder, right? Like, talk to your peer group as well. There may be competitors, but they are also your peers, and they can be really, really helpful.
So I saw your video about intrigue marketing.
Sure, yeah.
And I thought it was amazing, actually, really good. So in terms of like finding clients, you were talking about humanizing that initial connection. So you were saying the death of outbound, basically. So to connect on someone on a human level before you sell them. So talk to us a bit about the marketing strategy and how you can use that as a new founder starting a business.
Yeah. So, it doesn't apply to all businesses, because that intrigue marketing is much better for B2B businesses, where you do need to go out and establish a relationship, or where you're selling to a consumer that acts like a business. Where does that happen? Mostly when you're trying to sell to, say, like high net worth individuals, right? And going out and building a relationship first. I would say intrigue marketing is actually much more appropriate, as I've sort of matured on the idea, around the idea of networking, right? There are a lot of extractive people in this world. And the reality is, like, if you approach me and you're not either providing value to me from something interesting that you're doing, or you're just trying to take, I'm not interested anymore, right? So rather than hit me up and be like, hey, like, I got this great idea, you want to invest? I'm like, I don't know you. Like, no, right? Like, I mean, I'm happy to take a look. It's like, hey, I happen to be hosting this little event. This goes back to this idea, this little private member society that I run. My first outreach was always, hey, I don't know you. You're a billionaire, but I want nothing from you. I'm going to ask you to pay. I'm picking up the bill. No ask, no intention. Just come hang out with me and a couple of other people that I think you'll find as peers. That's all I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you who's on the guest list. Not going to even tell you where it's held until the day before. Just show up and let's see if you find value in that. And if you don't, you can leave at any time.
Yeah.
And while you're there, now that I provided you that value, you and I can now start to establish a personal relationship. And maybe I start to understand, like, these are the books you like to read. These are the struggles that you're facing. And maybe I have a solution. And at some point now, after that personal relationship is established, I can flip that switch and come to you and say, hey, I have this idea. Is this something we could talk about? Right. Now it's a slightly longer cycle, right? But it has exponentially increased my personal fundraising success and partnership success by building those relationships, sometimes years in advance of needing them, right? Not even knowing if I would ever need them. But now being able, as we did to say this last fundraising round with my current company, to be able to call upon some of these people that I invited to a dinner 3 or 4 years ago that remember me and the small value that I provide, and say, hey, Joe, so great to get to know you. We talked about this a long time ago. I remember you had a real interest in fintech. How's the kids? How's everything? Wonder if I can get half an hour to just chat with you about this, and not even ask about money. Just to be like, hey, do you have 30 minutes? I'm just a little confused on this idea. I'd love your advice. Everybody wants to give advice, right? And then, what's funny is, and this is as true as when I was told it 15 years ago as this day, ask for advice and get an investment. Ask for an investment and you'll get advice, right? When you come at somebody hard and you're asking for money, there's just certain cognitive processes that shut down and you go into defense mode. But if somebody comes to you and just says, hey, can I just say, I don't know what I don't know here. You're a real expert in this. Can I just lean on your knowledge for 30 minutes? And as you're talking to the idea and the person this kid's really got something. You guys, the number of conversations I've had like that, where somebody then all of a sudden says, you guys taking on investors? I'm like, yeah, we are, right? And even if you're coming in with that intention, right? It's fine. There's a little bit of a sort of a dance. These are emotional relationships that you're building with your investors. Some are very practical. They're cut and dried, and some just want to cut to the chase. Of course, right? Everyone's a little different. I don't mean to say this is everybody, but half the time, you just get to know somebody first as a human being. They'll appreciate it. I can say that now as a founder, as an investor. The number of emails and LinkedIn messages that I get. Hey, I thanks for connecting. You want to invest 50 grand in this crazy idea I have? I'm like,
sure, man.
The number of times that I've taken that seriously, that I've actually been like, yeah, it's a really good idea. It's one out of probably in the tens of thousands, or I actually looked at it and said, that's actually a really smart idea. And I didn't end up investing because there wasn't the right operational team in there. But it's 1 out of 10,000 I even responded to, right? I mean, all this stuff is spam these days. So
moving on now, I wanted to ask you, what opportunities do you see, or business opportunities do you see in the near future in your space?
Yeah, so the answers unfortunately aren't going to be as perhaps as creative as in other spaces. So fintech right now, AI is going to be a massive disruption, just absolutely massive. Will it be massive in terms of creating new businesses? Can't say. I think it's actually going to be more massive in terms of thinning out cost structure on the back end, because now people that were performing manual processes like customer service or better underwriting algorithms if you're issuing credit. AI is going to be taking over a lot of those processes, and already has to an extent. And so what that's going to lead to is less people being hired, less cost structure and necessity on the back end. Fintechs are very expensive to get off the ground because they are in a regulated industry. There are a lot of processes, a lot of people that are required. But with AI, you won't be able to just go over the regulatory hurdles. Those will still remain, but you'll be able to automate a lot of processes that'll lean out cost structure. And that's across all fintech, and lower sort of the cost itself, right? Because with credit, when you have to write off bad loans because your underwriting algo is off, you're going to have a cost associated with that as well. So I do see that. I see a lot more with embedded finance. So simple reality, and again, I come from a very American perspective, obviously. For the last 40 years, inflation-adjusted real wages have gone up 4%. In most developed economies, that's sort of generally true. And consumer price, which is like things like your cup of coffee, the books that you're reading, your TV, have gone up 400%.
Crazy.
So you have 100x increase on inflation-adjusted wage pricing, right? That is absolutely
mental,
insane, right? So the simple reality is most folks right now are exceedingly debt burdened, and in most developed economies. And layer on top of that now, your student loan cost. Laying on top of that, buying a car. Laying on top of that, buying a house. If you can even have savings to go and buy a house, right? Struggle is real, really is, right? And the middle class barely even exists anymore, right? There's just this bifurcation. You're either really poor or you're really rich. And set aside wealth gapping and things like that. Simple reality is more than ever in history, if you're born into poverty, you're more likely to die in poverty. I wouldn't say ever in history, say in more sort of recent history. There used to be a lot more social mobility. And while there certainly is still social mobility built in, it has also created some really just some patterns that where you're born is where you're going to die. It's because of this massive wealth gap, right? And so we have to solve that. It's a little bit of a philosophical side. Why do I bring that up? One of the biggest opportunities right now, because of this structural economic issue, is going to be in embedded finance, because the reality is almost all of us are going to need to finance a large portion of our lives going forward. So, I live in sort of the buy now, pay later world broadly. That idea is, I think, going to take a very strong foothold. Continuing. So I want to go buy something that maybe costs a few £100, but I'm going to finance it. Maybe not even on an interest rate basis or a minimal interest rate basis. Or a business is going to say, I'm willing to pay a lending third party, what's called a merchant discount rate, and maybe take a 10% haircut to allow you to now buy the TV, because 40 years ago, you just paid cash for it, right? You just sort of bought it, right? Maybe put it on a credit card if you needed to. But the reality is now, you can't just pay cash for it because you don't have it. Right. And we're seeing this play out not only in developed economies, but also in developing economies as well. Life is going to be heavily, heavily financed. And so this idea of embedded finance, and almost everywhere you go, you're going to have this idea of, something, pay later, right? Just in order to facilitate the transaction. Because the idea of plopping down $1,000 to go and buy something today is just not going to be practical anymore. I think that's being exacerbated with this wealth gap. So that's one thing. I'm actually speaking at a conference in a few weeks on this very topic. I see that becoming more and more prominent. That's my area of fintech. That's kind of where I see it.
So I really like, I saw Be Generous, that your current company. I really like the concept. So it's a social impact company, right? And from what I understood, is basically you help donors buy now and pay later in terms of donations.
That's exactly right.
So it allows charitable organizations to get financed a lot easier, and also people don't have to pay up front.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're going to try to cross-apply that idea here in the UK and the European Union as well. Right now, it's just in the US. That's where the company's based, just to kind of get started. But yeah, it's buy now, pay later for philanthropic and charitable giving, what we call donate now, pay later. And our ability to go out there and facilitate a charitable transaction that either wouldn't have happened at all, or might have happened, but at a smaller amount, right? Because I can give $100 today, but now if I can pay it off over 9 months, I might give $500. Charity gets all the money up front, right? Less a small fee that we charge, our merchant discount rate, and the donor still maintains the convenience of paying over time. And just to give you sort of the real world outcome of this, the average online donation, which is the space that we play in, is around $125 in the US, which donates around $500 billion a year. Almost 200 million people give a donation in the US every year. It's a little different in the UK because in the US there's very heavy tax benefits and tax incentives baked into charitable giving. So the average online donation is $125. Our average donation, which is also an online donation, is around $500.
Wow.
4.5 times
That's
larger.
crazy.
Right?
Is it interest free as well, right?
It's interest and fee free to the donor. Small merchant discount rate charged to the nonprofit. Now, the donor has an option to cover the fee. About 80% of them do. So the nonprofit actually pays a very de minimis charge to get a 4.5 times delta on a typical charitable transaction. So we have some amazing clients, PETA, Heifer International, some really big organizations that have signed on that, now at the end of the day, they do all the hard work. We don't do it. But there's some real upside because, how many cats and dogs are being saved now by the fact that there's a 4.5 increase in donations to that organization. How many more kids are getting an education? How many, fewer veterans are homeless and hungry tonight? Like there's some real knock-on implications. Allows me to put my head on the pillow at night and a little easier.
In terms of like where you're at the moment, how much have you made kind of so far from the businesses, or can you give like a ballpark figure?
Yeah, I think the numbers I'm more comfortable talking about are more so the numbers that we've raised historically. So I've raised a little more than I think probably $50 million across different businesses. So currently with Be Generous, we've raised just about $11 million right now. Most of that on equity, a little bit of a working capital line of credit, which we've not drawn against. It's the most that I've ever raised for a single business.
So you've been on both sides, haven't you? So is there any like investment opportunities that you might have missed that you'd regret now?
I'll tell two quick stories. First one is I missed an opportunity to invest in Uber at its like sort of seed or Series A stage. So my wife and I at the time were going out and pitching my first company on Buy That. We were on Sandhole Road, which is sort of the famous Silicon Valley road, where a lot of VCs are. We were meeting, I think he was with Bill Gurley, who's one of the lead principals at Benchmark Capital, kind of a famous investor. And we're out there and pitching the idea to him and his team, and he just wasn't feeling it, wasn't a good fit for their portfolio. Gave me a lot of really good advice. We said, hey, like I understand you do a little bit of investing. We have this open round right now, and I want to show you a company that we've invested in and maybe give you some ideas if you wanted to bring an idea back to us, what we look for, and also if you'd be interested in getting involved. We have a little bit of syndication of it. I was like, all right, let me see. And so he brings me this idea for this company that was doing at the time, I believe it was in the San Francisco Wharf area. Black cars on demand, right? So like town cars, to go to the airport or out to dinner or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, like interesting idea. I was like, I was a New Yorker at the time, and I was like, I can go out and hail a cab.
Yeah.
It seems cheaper. It seems easier. If I want a black car for the night, I can, call. There was a service called Carmel back then that everybody call and take me to the airport. And I was like, all right, interesting idea. And they were just opening in New York. At that point, I think they had just raised their Series A. And so I'm walking out and I kind of looked at my wife and I was like, that was the dumbest idea ever, right? I was like, just like gut reaction, like,
Yeah.
And, the company ended up being Uber, obviously. And I was thinking sort of very practically. I was like, oh, well, the regulatory issues, like in New York, you have to have like a taxi medallion and like specific TL and C licenses. And I was like, they're never going to, how are they going to do that? Like, I was like, they're never going to expand. And listen, what did I know? So, it leads me to a story from Jamie Dimon, actually. I was fortunate enough, as I mentioned, to go to Yale for my graduate school. And my degree was in global affairs. But I was sitting there taking a class in the School of Management. And the class was taught by two really interesting guys. One's named Stephen Roach. He's the former chief economist from Morgan Stanley. Mm-hmm. The other guy is Jeffrey Garten, who was the dean of the school. And I think he was either like early at BlackRock or Blackstone. Yeah. His wife is Ina Garten, the Barefoot Contessa, who's a very famous TV personality. Great guys, and they're teaching this class called Wall Street in Washington. It's a very small class, maybe 20 of us, and the entire class, you had to apply to get into it, is going to New York and to Washington, D.C. and meeting with their friends. These are two relatively well-known guys. Their friends are chairman of the Federal Reserve, the CEO of this Fortune 500 company. I mean, like, pretty heavy hitters that, had no business being around. One of their friends was Jamie Dimon. And this is 2010, I think, so 2 years after the financial crisis. And JP Morgan had actually gotten off relatively unscathed, had a little bit of burn, but not much. Yeah. And it actually acquired a few companies out of that. I always forget if it was Lehman or Bear that they acquired out of the bankruptcy. And so I'm in Jamie Dimon's office at JP Morgan. It's me and like 15 people. The CEO of this company, largest bank in the world, and he at that time had just become a billionaire.
CEO of JP Morgan.
Yeah.
Wow.
So this is Jamie Dimon, right?
All right.
Yeah. So he had just become a billionaire.
Yeah.
Largest bank in the world, a couple trillion in assets, something along those lines. And here we are. We got 2 hours with him, just having lunch. And he's a fascinating guy. Curses like a sailor, right? This guy like went to all the right boarding schools and everything. Like you would think he's like a refined gentleman. Every other word of his mouth is F this, F that. And I loved him. He was like, just let his hair down with us a little bit. And he's sitting there, and he's like, any questions? And I raise my hand. As much as I'm really, fascinated by your life and work, and said, I want to understand, like, how did you avoid the issues that so many other banks fell into? And I'd also recently just met with Dick Fold, who's the CEO of Lehman, who is, just the story, as the story goes, like, was just like so arrogant, like, just like took a private car in, took his own separate elevator, never talked to his employees. We all know what happened, right? To Lehman. So how did you avoid that? And he looked at me and he said something I'll never forget. He said, I was smart enough to know when I was stupid. I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, I'm a very well-educated guy. I think Harvard MBA, all the right pedigree, billionaire. Like, he's like, what would I do every day? Call in all my division heads and be like, what are you working on today? Tell me about it. And he'd walk the floor and he'd talk to the employees and he would just take the temperature and he just knew what was going on. And so one day he calls up the head of his complex derivatives organization. He's like, so what are you working on? And the guy's telling all about, these asset-backed securities and things like that. It's just really complex derivative, exotic stuff, right? All the stuff that caused the financial crisis. And he's like, pretty smart guy. I don't really understand this. He's like, come up to my office in an hour. I want to sit down and he said, explain it to me like I'm 12. So the guy attempted to do that, but I don't think you can explain these complex derivatives to like someone like that. And Jamie was like, I don't get it. He said, I want you to start unwinding our positions. Wow. And this is like months before the financial crisis. And so as the famous story goes, they start basically calling Deutsche Bank and like start dumping their crap on them and elsewhere, and mostly got out of the business. And everyone thought, these guys are stupid. These are high yielding assets. No one knows what's going on with them. Like, we'll buy all your stuff. And then basically went to zero, right? And again, this is a guy, well-educated billionaire, who stepped outside of the sort of normal ego and arrogance that might come with that position in life, all the experience that he had, and said, I don't understand. I don't know. Explain it to me. And when he didn't understand it, he moved away from it, right? And that, to me, is the hallmark of an amazing leader, an amazing CEO, to be like, yes, I am the leader, and I should have maybe a little more intelligence, insight, or whatever. That's why I'm here. But if I don't understand something, I'm not going to be like, maybe like a Dick Fold who's like, I don't care. It's making money, right? I'm not going to unpack it. I'm not going to look a little bit deeper. And here is a Jamie Dimon that was doing exactly that. Wow. I admire the hell out of him for putting that forward. It's, it's an impressive thing. And so for your audience, always ask what's going on. Constantly be learning, and don't have that mantle of arrogance on you. Take that moment. And you're no better than Jamie Dimon, I assure you. Right? There's only a few guys like that in the world, to be able to really try to understand your business and the things that are going on. Because if you don't do that, you're going to end up on the other side, which is going to be a pretty negative outcome.
Wow. When you don't know something, just ask. Don't be afraid to kind of look stupid.
Don't be afraid to ask. I think that's it, right? Don't be afraid to look a little stupid, a little silly, because take the small, maybe reputational hit with that head of this division who's like, how does this guy not know what's going on, to now unpack and resolve a really big problem.
Wow, that's crazy. So just to wrap it up, if someone wants any tips or advice, where can they reach you to, on like email or?
Best place to reach me is probably going to be via email.
We'll put it in a link below.
I have an Instagram, but I don't really check it. And I'm not on TikTok. I think my daughter created an account for me, but I do not.
We're going to get you on TikTok.
So best place to get me right now is my first name, Neil, Neil, at begenerous.com. That's the letter B, generous.com. Feel free to hit me up. I love mentoring. I love, providing advice to early stage entrepreneurs and businesses. So I'll try to be as responsive as I can. Like I said, take my advice. Don't ask me to invest if you haven't met me yet, right? Like, take a minute, provide some value. Tell me a funny story. Do something.
We'll take you on a date first.
Hey, whatever, right? Let's dance before we date, right? Before we marry, right? So let's do that normal progress of human relationship and show that you've paid attention, right, to the things that we've talked about here. But I'm very happy to be as generous with my time as I can, and be helpful to your audience in whatever way they'd see fit.
Perfect. It's amazing.
Really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
My pleasure.
It's good. Thanks for watching, guys. Really great episode, I think. Insight into a really high level entrepreneur is actually doing it. So if you want any tips or advice, make sure you reach out to Neil. Also follow us on The Venture Room on TikTok, The Venture Room on YouTube, and Venture_Room on Instagram. And we'll see you on the next one.
Peace.